Welcome to the AI Chat Podcast. I'm your host, Jaeden Schaefer. Today on the show, we have the pleasure of being joined by Cory Ondrejka, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Smart News, where he leads the development of AI-powered tools to deliver balanced and personalized news. Previously, he co-created the groundbreaking virtual world Second Life and held senior roles at Meta and Google, shaping mobile product and design strategies. Super excited to have you here, Cory.
Jaeden, thank you so much for having the chance to chat today.
Just like to dive right into it. I think something a lot of people are curious about is how AI is kind of impacting news. I think there's been a lot of like lawsuits of publishers against Google for AI snippets and like all these different things. From what you guys are seeing, how do you see AI interacting with news today? And I guess what are some of the features that you guys are rolling out? You have a news app that's really popular on iOS and Android. Where people can kind of get this balanced news. How are you guys seeing AI play into that?
Yeah, so NewsArc, which we just launched on iOS and Android, which is our new, very much AI-powered product, fundamentally would not be possible without the current wave of AI that we've seen, and in particular, large language models. And the reason for that is when you think about how every traditional news product for the last decade plus has tried to aggregate and sort news, it's always been attention reinforcement. So it has always been, what are people liking? What are people sharing? What are people commenting on? And while that worked really well when it was early in Facebook's feed and it was things your friends were posting, particularly in the United States that has such a polarized news environment, the challenge is that the easiest way to get attention is to stoke outrage.
Sure,
and so what we've seen, of course, is outrage just dominating how all of the traditional aggregators navigate news content. And so with NewsArc, we were doing something really different, which was, could we actually understand the news enough? Could we actually understand the quality of individual articles, of how they tie into a larger news event? And we could use that as our ground truth of what matters to you as an American news consumer, what matters to you as somebody curious about a particular topic. We literally could not have done that without not just the last 3 or 4 years of LLM's emergence, but really the last 6 months where capabilities have just gone through the roof and the costs have been going down dramatically because there's such intense pricing competition between the different model providers. So from our perspective, we think this is a really exciting time for AI news, but we're also making a bunch of really important decisions. So we don't train on publisher content. We don't even fine tune. We're not building a model on publisher content. Like, we think it's really important if you are somebody who's creating, whose value is in your particular style or voice. Fundamentally, we don't think training models on that is good for you or frankly, good for the person trying to understand the news, because at that point, your data is baked into the model, and even worse, your style is baked into the model.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's why we're making a bunch of decisions that are pretty atypical for other AI companies out there. And one last point, Smart News from the beginning has always just paid for content. And so we actually pay publishers. And
Really?
so so we pay publishers for their content, which again, I think is just really critical if we're going to have a long-term healthy relationship between the news ecosystem, AI, and news consumers.
I want to get into like what that looks like, but just for people that don't know, Smart News, basically a place where people can get access to a lot of different stories from a lot of different platforms, but huge place where people get news. When you start looking at how this changes, because I was just looking at NewsArc, right? So this is its own unique app. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct.
Yeah. So you've created a whole new app. I'm assuming this is probably too big of a rewrite to just like overhaul your current product. You're like, can we want to create a new thing? Talk a little bit about what NewsArc does, right? So you said you're not training on publishers' news. Are you essentially doing something where your people can set like interests and it's going to go research that story and write like a summary of what's happening for people, or what is the product NewsArc doing?
So it's a little bit different from that. And the reason for a different product is a few things. One, exactly as you said, Smart News has been around for more than a decade at this point. And as anybody who's carried technology forward for a long period of time, at some point it's nice to be able to have a clean break because technology does keep moving. But more than that, we view the news space a little bit like Meta has both Facebook and Instagram and Threads, right? You have different products that are solving different problems. We think with NewsArc, we can move into a space that's much more about people who really want to get an efficient way to understand what's going on in the world, what's most important, but also go deep on a topic if they are sort of in a lean back, It's that your first break of the day, you're sort of tracking the news and you have a few minutes to really dive into a story or two. And so because of that being the goal of this deep, really high quality news reading experience, and because where we started in building out a new platform for this was using AI to really understand in real time what's happening across all the news that we are aware of, which is a lot. We ingest a
Mhm.
ton of news from partners every day. And so, given all that, one of the first things we explored is what everybody does with LLMs, which is, ooh, we can do bullets or we can do synopses or we can do, a shortened rewrite of it.
Right.
And we actually did that about 18 months ago. It was one of the first things that we did.
Okay.
And look, lots of products are out there and we'll keep exploring that. Our experience of it and our experience with early users of the product was that it just fundamentally wasn't really that interesting. So
Mm,
instead, what we do is we try to route you to the best article from one of our publishers that we think best covers the story, that got all the claims in the stories first. It
mm,
is that if you're going to read one article, read this one.
okay.
And then what we do is we say, well, what if there actually is a debate? And one of the things that people misunderstand about news is when you talk about news events, the coverage is actually generally pretty consistent. And I don't even mean like syndication, where it's literally duplicates, but
Right.
like it's usually pretty consistent. And as different sources get more information, all the different stories kind of absorb from each other and
Mhm.
converge generally. But sometimes the story is still emerging or it's changing really suddenly. And so what NewsArc does is we always give you that first story that we think this is the most best story to read to understand what's going on. But then do you want to go deeper or understand a slightly different viewpoint? Or maybe there's a difference between rural coverage and coastal coverage. Maybe there's a difference between East Coast, West Coast. Maybe there is a difference between what, Reuters is reporting versus some other sources reporting. We'll then say, hey, here's the next article you should read. And we're doing that again with a very deep analysis of what's the overall quality of this article, how well written is it, are the claims actually mapping back to what we understand to be the reality of this story. But at every step, what we're actually trusting is that there are really, really amazing journalists out there who are working incredibly hard to understand new topics, to understand what's going on in the world, to understand breaking news, who've done deep, deep, research-based reporting. And what we want to do is we want to highlight them, right? We want to bring them to the forefront and route you to that article really as directly as we can. And of course, because we're paying for it, we can do it all within the app. So you never end up on, a mobile website with all of the ads
Sure.
jumping in front of you and all that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, talk to me a little bit about the decision, what your approach versus maybe like a Google approach where they have like the AI snippets coupled it. Well, I have a few different questions. First of all, I guess is like, what was your take on that? Obviously, AI is capable of doing that. Google is doing that at a high level. I mean, they're getting sued, so maybe that's my answer right there. But talk to me a little bit about your approach on deciding to route people to one particular article versus kind of creating like a summary or something like that.
Yeah, and obviously, Google is solving their own set of challenges as a search company. News isn't actually a search endeavor. And it's something that we've watched search companies struggle
Mhm.
with news over the years because the reality is news is new all the time, right? You don't actually know what to search for. You don't know what's happening. You don't know the new thing. And so when you get to a news story, first of all, a well written news story already does everything we want in terms of synopsizing in the first paragraph. That's what every journalist does, right? So if I can get you to the best story and you read the first paragraph, guess what? You've now gotten a probably better written synopsis than the LLM can do, although LLMs are definitely getting very good at that. But you also have the rest of the article sitting right there. And so for us, we did a lot of testing with ourselves, with early users. And what we found is even when we could produce very, very good bullets or synopses, and let's be clear, we all jumped on bullets and synopses because we're like, this will be so great. You know what you're getting into, you know what's going on. And then it just wasn't compelling. It wasn't what you wanted because instead you think about how people navigate news because most news consumers will come back to news multiple times a day. And what you see is a little bit depends upon what moment in the day it is, how much time they have, what their interest level is. You have that first sort of headline scan Like, is anything big happening that I really need to know about? Am I going to be surprised by something? Is something hitting a story that I've kind of been tracking for multiple days? Headlines are already written to do that really, really well. And rewriting them, we could quibble about whether we could make them better or not, but we weren't making them hugely better. And so
Hmm.
instead, let's take advantage of what we can get from a mix of the headline from the story. And maybe what we do is we abstract the news event that's going on, right? Because you think about a news event that's happening, there's usually a few word description that people kind of converge on to be
Hmm.
like, oh, we're talking about the Summer Olympics, or we're talking about, something going, a particular lawsuit or trial or whatever.
Hmm.
And being able to generate that is really helpful because it helps kind of
Okay.
cue people into like, wait, what is this in regards to? But then the sooner we can get you the story and the well-written headline, that's great. And if you then are like, no, I'm now in a kind of a little bit of a lean back, or I'm taking a break, or I want to go a little bit deeper, or I'm going into some news that I'm just curious about. Because remember, news doesn't just mean like what the government is doing or health and safety. Like, news is everything. There's hard news, there's soft news. And one of our hypotheses that we've been excited because we kind of keep validating it to ourselves as we go research this. And then as we see early user behavior in any given domain, there's like a great story and a not great story. And whether you're talking about the deepest, like financial reporting, or you're talking about celebrity gossip, there are really good versions of the story and there are not so good versions of the
Mm.
story. And your time is super precious. So if I can do a better job of getting you to the great story, why would I put AI in front of that?
I love that. I also love that you're doing the AI for the small summary. News publications have to drive clicks. And so I feel like a lot of the times the headlines might be crafted in a way to just try to grab clicks in whatever way is most extreme, even if the article itself is like pretty balanced. So I think honestly, doing a summary where people just kind of get the broad concept from AI, that's a great way to get people into it. A couple questions. First of all, is in regards to like personalization on this. You mentioned trying to get people the best story. I'm sure you have an algorithm, the way that you try to get people the best story. Is there any sort of personalization that's taken into effect, or is this team wins the Super Bowl? And you pick that this article is the best article that covers that particular thing? Is everyone going to see that one article?
Yeah, so we divide things into a couple different categories. First off, we talk about the daily dozen. We think on any given day, there are probably about 12 stories that, based on the country you live in, and right now we're only in the United States, but based on the country you live in, there are probably about 12 things that apply to you. And so we always lead out with the daily dozen. And there's no personalization there. You can decide you want to, like we call it shushing, mute a story. And it's
Sure.
not just muting the publisher or the particular story. It's actually muting the news event.
Pick.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, like me, but not as broad as topic. Like, it's not like muting sports, but maybe you don't care about the Super Bowl and you're like, I just really don't need to hear
Totally.
anything more
Yeah.
about the Super Bowl. What that lets us do, because again, we are constructing this model of what is happening in all of the news, we can actually maintain that mute across multiple days, even as different articles are landing, because they're all part of the same underlying news event. And we can also, if something really, really big changes, break through your mute and say, even though you wanted to mute this, something so dramatic happened. Going back to our mission to be delivering quality information to you, we're going to deliver this anyway, but highlight to you that we're doing it intentionally. There's a second category, which is, you think about it like a newspaper that used to have like an art section, sports section, these different sections, right? This is another place where once you have a model of what's happening across all of these articles that we are able to operate on with our partners, then you have the opportunity to be like, well, hey, agent, pretend you are writing the art section for Parade magazine or something.
Hmm.
It's the perfect agentic goal, right? This iterative multi-step exploration looking for newsworthy patterns, interesting things. And so we use that to build basically sections that are very similar to, what a newspaper or other service would do. And again, we're still applying all of our quality metrics to what we pick to go into those. But rather than being limited to those 12, it's like, oh no, this is the movie section. This is the TV section. This is, product reviews. So that's us as a NewsArc being opinionated on what we view as quality and importance and relevance. And there is not a personalization signal in that. The flip side is you telling us what you're interested in. And we talk about that as explicit choice, where you're like, no, I really, really care about AI, or I really care about broader technology. I care
Mhm.
about cars. I care about sports. I care about fashion. If you tell us those things, what we then do is go apply, again, all of our ranking knowledge. But what we do is we expose way more of, because you're limited first by the category, you're going to go by its nature deeper into that category than you would have otherwise gone. So that's you telling us. And then the last way you can tell us is maybe you just like The Atlantic, or maybe you just like a particular news source like The Verge or whatever. Well, you can tell us that too. And then what we do is we say, well, okay, we're going to go build basically a daily magazine of just the sources you want. And so we call
Mm.
that a collection. I used to use an RSS feed, or I used to go to their website. And now instead, I can just be a NewsArc and go to collection and be, oh, what a cool way to get a deep look into, what these other folks are talking about, what these different sources are talking about.
Oh, I love that. I just want to double click on one thing you said, which is you talked about your AI agent, and I just
Mhm.
want to make sure I'm understanding that product correctly. So essentially, is the AI agent, you're not writing the stories, right? So the AI agent is going out and it's finding all of the different stories, and it's basically creating like a feed that would be relevant to the person. Is that what it
It's
is?
doing a little bit tighter than that, which is
Okay.
not only does it go finding the collection of things in a very similar way to us using AI to say, hey, this is part of this particular news event. Kind of think of it more a little bit like a newsletter, where we
Sure.
do a
Okay.
top line of, well, what is the theme? A lot of times, like, think about like a movie section. A lot of times you end up getting dominated by what is the big movie opening this weekend.
Yeah.
And what's great is the agent finds that because it shows up so clearly in the stories as it goes spelunking for them. But then once it finds that anchor, well, what else does it pull in? Well, stories about the stars, or stories about the director, or stories about the
Okay.
composer. And so you get these naturally very thematic views.
And is that if people are wanting to go deeper in on one particular story, for example? Yeah.
So that is coming.
Okay.
We don't have that fully unlocked yet. We think there is definitely an exploration path there that
Sure.
maps to this really cleanly. What we didn't want to do sort of out of the gate is just have people sort of going on these random walks and
Mhm.
not having a real direction for why they're there or why it showed up, particularly because we're starting from this news basis. Again, we're not a search product. We don't view
Mhm.
ourselves that way. And so as we get a cleaner look at how are people using it, what is the entry point? Because we have a lot of things we could do with the agents that we have running. And rather than just doing all of them, we're a pretty opinionated group of product developers. And so we're coming in with a hypothesis. We believe at least tens and tens of millions of Americans who still want to read the news, but they're frustrated. They're
Totally.
currently engaged in news avoidance. They don't want to just read about outrage. They don't want to just see polarizing content. They don't want to just get mad because they're being taken advantage of, because
Yeah.
that's how feeds operate. And so as we think about those news readers who cross shop, they already are reading from multiple sources. They want to get to that complete view. That's where we're starting first. And we really want to nail that experience. And then we're going to expand from there.
On that topic, right? I think obviously you guys are based in America. America has very political or very polarized views on news, especially in like hot button areas, like let's say politics. I guess what's your strategy, right? You mentioned people don't want to just read the news and be mad, which is I feel like the case with myself half the time, and probably everyone, right? And so I think that can create that kind of news avoidance. But at the same time, like I want to stay up to date on things. What is your approach? I'm assuming you serve political news. How do you like what's your approach to making that balanced? I think everyone, whatever your perspective is, feels like certain sources can be very obviously biased one way or another. Let's just say Fox and CNN, right? You get very different headlines in an article from those. What's your guys' approach to making that balanced and to, I guess, serving people that are trying to get a balanced view on topics?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. So a few things. One, part of the reason why our front page of that daily dozen isn't just the dozen straight, right? Part of why we blend in your topic interest. One is to just make a more pleasant reading experience, because it's kind of nice actually to be like, big news headlines, super important, super serious a lot of times. the thing that I'm actually, said was interested in. It
Hmm.
kind of allows you to flow through that in a way that we've found to be much more enjoyable and actually give you sort of the emotional time and energy to go deeper on important things and potentially to come back to them. Like our dozen stays pretty stable during the day
Sure.
because news stories don't move around that much during the day. Obviously, as new news comes in, it moves, but it's
Hmm.
relatively stable. And so what we see is people will come back and go deeper on stories. That's the first thing. The second one is one of my favorite questions because we spend so much time both debating this and then digging into the underlying ground truth as we can find it on this. So when you talk about news organizations, and I do want to separate news from opinion because most news sources have opinion departments also.
Sure.
But within the news departments, there's much more alignment than most people, I think, suspect. And it's this starting point of you can't be an American right now and not start from political polarization is the dimension to analyze everything on because everything is split that way. And because that's how that's how we experience it. That's how we get spoken to about it. And of course, because opinion dominates so many of the channels that we have access to, it's also true because opinion does split that way.
Hmm.
What's fascinating about the news portions of these companies, much less split within the news organizations. Now, the headline, as you pointed out, might be different. Some of the tone in the article might be different, but the claims that are made up in the article in terms of like, we think this happened to this person at this time, the claims are very aligned and they tend to align more over time as the story evolves.
Sure.
And instead, we find there are actually other dimensions that are often more useful for finding a complete view of the story, where it's like, well, this was the early article versus a later article, or East Coast versus West Coast, or urban versus rural, or the place where it happened versus a nearby major city's coverage of it. And it's why we talk about the complete story rather than balanced because
Hmm.
we're not trying to do we're going to give you competing viewpoints and then you decide. I mean, you
Yeah.
can obviously go spelunking in our stuff to go do that if you want. But what we lead out with is as best we can determine from all of the coverage that this is what actually happened. And
Mhm.
this is the best article to read to understand that. And if there are competing viewpoints, we'll also try to understand where the competing viewpoint is coming from and help you understand that, hey, when you're going into this next article, expect that it's a later viewpoint on it, or it has new information, or it is it seems like this is a politically based difference. And we find that it allows you to, frankly, much more quickly dive into an article and a news event and much more quickly get a sense of, oh no, actually, we all kind of agree on this. And that's another place where we think it is a very, very different experience because you come out of a morning of reading NewsArc, you're like, no, no, actually, most of what's going on, there's a lot of agreement on, which of course isn't what you see if you are first, bombarded just with opinion pieces or just starting your news journey that in some of the other ways that you could.
Help me understand that. When you say when people go into reading NewsArc, they come out feeling like there's more consensus on a topic. Are they saying that after reading like one article from one source? Or are you saying that there's like multiple sources that they would get that information from?
Yeah. So even if you read multiple sources and from very diverse publishers, what's interesting when you're reading about news events is how consistent the coverage ends up being. What we try not to do is we try not to give you like 11 articles that are all the same
Sure.
because
Okay.
that's a bad experience in a
Totally.
different
Yeah.
way. But we do want to make sure because we have such a diversity of source publishers. One of the things that's been pretty cool is sources that might seem more traditionally viewed as politically leaning
Hmm.
often show up very high in our quality scores because again we're talking about their news bureaus, not their
Yeah.
opinion bureaus.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's actually kind of refreshing to read a really well written article from a publisher you might not normally go to
Sure. Yeah.
and be like, this actually covered this in a really thoughtful, sane, complete, effective way. In early testing, we've had that conversation with a lot of early readers where folks are kind of surprised because they're not sitting in a bubble and they're seeing sources they might otherwise have just trivially rejected and getting really high quality news from it.
Honestly, I love that topic and I love that concept. Okay, you're warming me up to this concept of news. Primarily, I get my news just from X because I'm originally from Canada. When I first moved to
Mhm.
America, I had like CNN notifications on my MacBook, so every time a CNN article would come up, it would pop up, and that's where I got my news. I didn't really know anything. I didn't know anything about American politics. I just got like so disenfranchised with CNN because I think I got a lot of their opinion pieces where I would feel like I would see a story and then their take on it, I would be like lots of the facts might be true, but like there's some crazy bias, right? And so I think I just got disenfranchised and just stopped reading news. I didn't read Fox, I didn't read CNN. I just like was like, there's way too much opinion. It's ridiculous. I'll try to get it somewhere else. But like you mentioned, the really high quality scores can come, right? Like CNN obviously spends an insane amount of money and Fox News spends an insane amount of money. And so they really do put a lot of the money isn't just money, it's actually effort and work that goes into making it a really high quality product, you could say, but a piece of content that people can consume. And so, yeah, if you can separate it from the political opinions that are just obviously trying to get clicks and money for their base, but if you could find a kind of down the line article, I think that could be really useful. And I'd be open to reading articles from all sorts of news sources that I may not agree with all their opinion pieces, but if they factually cover something, happy to read it if they cover it in a balanced way. So I think that's really interesting.
I mean, you've really hit on something that's critical here, which is if your economics are built on traffic and advertising, of course you're going to send the spiciest, most
Right.
attention grabbing headlines possible. We all remember different waves of different products and platforms getting just sort of inundated and taken over by different versions of this. That's not our model, right? We pay publishers for their content, and where we pay them more is when their articles are rising to the top more often. So we're
Mm,
actually aligned with quality for them. For us, their most valuable content is their best news content. And it's just a different model. There aren't any other aggregators trying to do it with the model that we're choosing to go down with NewsArc. Part of why that's so exciting is you change this ecosystem and you change the incentives and you open up different possibilities at the same time that all of this magical AI horsepower is appearing. From my standpoint, as somebody who loves building products, who loves building things that allow people to connect with each other and understand things, like it could not be a more exciting time to be working on this.
as we're wrapping up, I got to ask you about one other story. I actually kind of love what you guys are doing for a lot of reasons. There's one story which is essentially the founders of Instagram, Kevin Syndrome and Mike
Yeah.
Krieger. They made an app called Artifact. It was a news app. They sold it to Yahoo last year, so they essentially kind of wound down. They sold it to Artifact. They went and joined Anthropic. I'm not sure if you've done much research or deep dive or looked at that product much. I'm assuming it's in your industry. What do you think they maybe got right and what do you think they got wrong? Obviously, the product wound down, they sold it off, they moved on. But like, what is the difference here? What do you think maybe they missed out on there?
Well, so disclosure, I know Kevin and Mikey. I was there at Facebook when we acquired Instagram, worked
Okay.
together, helped Kevin build the short-lived Windows mobile version of Instagram. And so, we crossed paths a lot during that period. So I love that they did Artifact, and they built a really beautiful product. They're both super freaking smart. They have taste. They build beautiful things. But Artifact was under the hood a pretty conventional attention reinforcement feed. When you saw what it prioritized, it was very, very typical for what we were seeing in other news aggregators and in other attention reinforcement products. And while they did do a pivot onto AI, which I think was really cool, what they were doing, again, I think it was that sort of first wave of AI use that I'm glad they were exploring it. And it gave, I think, everybody a chance to kind of see what parts of that worked, what parts of it didn't. I wish they were still in the news space. I mean, I think it's like Mikey being at Anthropic is really good for Anthropic. So I think
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
probably a good thing too. But, it's always exciting to have smart people operating in a space that you're operating in because it gives you a chance to see a different set of ideas getting explored. It gives you a chance to see, are people responding differently than you would expect? And so they tried something really, really hard. And let's be clear, news is a hard business to be in right now. I'm glad that they tried it. I'm sorry that they failed, but they're really smart folks.
Okay. I love it. Very diplomatic answer on that. Really excited to keep following along. For anyone interested, what's the best way for them to find NewsArc or to try out your products?
Yeah. Yeah. Newsarc.com and go there. You can get it for Android and iOS and it's free to use. Go get it.
All right. Thank you so much, Cory. We'll leave a link in the description, by the way, for anyone listening to NewsArc if you want to go check it out. excited to follow along on your journey. You guys have absolutely crushed it with Smart News, obviously, over the years. It's a 10-year-old company, but blown away by the traction you've had. Excited to see you grow NewsArc and to follow along with that, and hope to have you back on the show again to do a follow-up maybe some point as it continues to grow. To all of the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the AI Chat podcast. Make sure to leave us a review wherever you get your episodes, wherever you get your podcasts, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.